There was a lot of excitement in the shooter production office because Prince Charles and Princess Diana were in Bangkok. One of my Thai assistants, Surami, was anxious to go over to the Regent at my hotel, where apparently Prince Charles was going to be visiting. I'm not sure why he was there, but disappointingly, Diana was not with him. Surami and I joined the throng of adoring Thai fans in the lobby of the hotel, just as Prince Charles appeared and began talking to the various dignitaries lined up to meet him. And then, in what seemed like a spontaneous move, he headed for a group of Thai hotel staff, which pleased them enormously. Well, since Surami and I were standing behind the staff, we were pretty pleased too. We were close enough to Charles to hear his conversation, where he spoke a few words of Thai, asking a young woman what she did in the hotel. She responded in English and complimented Charles on his Thai accent. "Thank you," he responded, "but your English is far better than my Thai." He was very gracious and genuine with everyone. Naturally, most people wanted to know where Diana was, and Charles said that she was visiting an orphanage, which seemed exactly the kind of thing this very special woman would be doing. As mentioned in my last episode, the casting and filming of Shooter went well, and the crew, although absolutely nowhere near as great as the Good Morning Vietnam crew, were really good. They were decent. However, I can't say the same for those on Casualties of War. Perhaps it was the nature of the story about a US Army sergeant fighting the war in Vietnam who captures a young Vietnamese girl and then is gang raped and murdered. But I found the atmosphere uncomfortable. I never actually met the director, Brian De Palma, but his producer told me that Brian could tell that some of the students in the classroom scene in Good Morning Vietnam were Thai and not Vietnamese, and apparently it spoiled the movie for him. Well, it wasn't a great start for me. De Palma's producer asked me where I was going to find the young Vietnamese girl who gets raped, because De Palma insisted that she be as authentic as possible, and perhaps even have experienced sexual assault. Oh, what? Oh, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. He smiled and shrugged his shoulders, and I had to believe that he was joking. Yeah, he was joking, right? But who would joke about such a thing? Or even suggest a young woman actually relive such a violent attack on her body? Since De Palma had a reputation for being somewhat sadistic in his films and misogynistic, I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised by the similar attitude of his production team. The previous year, when I was casting Good Morning Vietnam, I'd visited a Vietnamese refugee camp near Bangkok with Kim Tran, who I'd cast in the classroom scene. I was shocked that in 1987, 12 years after the end of the Vietnam War, there were still Vietnamese refugees waiting to find homes. I wasn't able to cast any of the refugees in the film, but I had thought of going there to look for a young girl for Casualties. However, after this crude and insensitive remark, I knew that I wouldn't be doing that. I also realized that I didn't want to work on this film. Since it appeared that De Palma already had doubts about my casting abilities, I didn't feel too committed to it. I was actually not a happy camper at all. At this point, Shooter was still filming, and it was when we were in Kanchanaburi, home to the bridge on the River Kwai, that I made my decision to leave Casualties of War. I was talking to actors and extras I'd cast on Shooter and asked if they were interested in appearing in De Palma's film. Oh, I was cringing as I told them the storyline, and they were doing the same. How could I, in all honesty, encourage them to be in a film that I didn't believe in? Where was my integrity? A few days later, at the wrap party for Shooter, saying goodbye to the friends I'd made on the film, I knew what I had to do. When I got back to my hotel around 1 o'clock in the morning, I called Barry Levinson. Fortunately, it was a decent hour in LA, so I didn't wake him from a deep sleep. I told him that I was miserable and that my heart just wasn't into this horrible film. I hate it, Barry, I hate it. Well, you don't have to stay, he said. "Why don't you come back and work on this new film I'm directing?" "What is it?" "Rain Man." "What's it about, Barry?" I asked. "Well, it's not about gang rape and murder," he said with a laugh. "Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise are the leads, and I could use your help casting on location," he said. Well, it wasn't much of a sell. He had me at Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. The next day, I'd arranged a huge casting session for minor speaking roles in Casualties and had the help of an American guy, Randy, who'd lived in Bangkok for a number of years and who'd been very helpful finding local people for extras on Good Morning Vietnam. In that one 11-hour day, we auditioned 60 actors and non-professionals and put them on tape for De Palma. Since I was quitting the film, I wanted to leave in a blaze of glory, and no one could say I hadn't done the work. I then handed over the audition tape to De Palma's producer, together with my letter of resignation. I told him that I'd done as much as I could and was very confident that Randy could handle the rest of the casting. There was not too much resistance from the producer because I was close to the end of my contract anyway, and De Palma had already chosen a few actors I'd previously auditioned, including 3 American friends of mine who'd appeared in Shooter. But I had a major obstacle to overcome. You may recall that I was an illegal alien and not supposed to work in the States. In 1986, Ronald Reagan introduced the Amnesty Bill, and illegals who'd lived in the States since 1982, I'd been there since 1980, and could prove it, were able to apply for a green card. I'd started this process with a lawyer early in 1987, but when I told him that I was going to Thailand for at least 6 months to work on a film, he said he couldn't represent me. The law was that I couldn't leave the country for longer than 30 days, or I would be disqualified from applying for a green card. Consequently, I was quite nervous when it was time for me to return to LA in 1987, after several months spent in Southeast Asia. My one saving grace was that I had a Canadian passport. I had booked my return ticket to Vancouver with a layover in Los Angeles. I would then cash in the LA to Vancouver portion of the ticket. This was a trick I had devised when travelling between the States and England. As I stood in the immigration line at the airport, I looked to see which officer seemed congenial and wouldn't give me a hard time. The one that looked the worst, he was a surly young man. I ended up with him. "Where have you been?" he asked, hardly looking at me. "Bangkok," I told him. "Business or pleasure?" "Both, actually." He then wanted to know what I meant. I told him that I'd been working on a film called Good Morning Vietnam. He didn't seem too impressed, and as he flipped through my passport, I started to sweat. Then, quite nonchalantly, he said, "Who's in this film?" "Robin Williams." At the sound of Robin's name, his whole demeanour changed. His face lit up. "Wow, I love that guy. He's a genius." I told him that Robin was also a lovely person. Then, with a smile, the officer stamped my passport. "Enjoy your stay in Los Angeles, ma'am." Phew, I made it. Now, 8 months later, I was leaving Thailand again, but I knew I couldn't risk returning directly to LA because immigration officers were apparently a lot savvier about the 30-day travel rule than they had been. So I booked a direct flight from Bangkok to Vancouver, where luckily I had a friend I could stay with. I also had a friend in Seattle, Connie, and I'd already arranged for her to drive over the border to Vancouver and pick me up a couple of days after my arrival. I would then take a plane from Seattle to Los Angeles. When we arrived at the US-Canada border, Connie showed her passport, and the officer asked the reason for a day-long visit to Vancouver. Connie responded, "Shopping," which was a common reason for Seattleites visiting the Canadian city for a day. I can't remember the officer asking for my passport, which seems strange. Or perhaps it was an angel intervention, one of more to come. All I knew was that I was free and clear and on my way back to Los Angeles from Seattle after close to 3 months in Thailand. Next time, on the road with Rain Man. If you're enjoying my episodes, my social media guru, Horatio, has asked that you please like the recordings, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when I post my next episode on Sunday. Many thanks, and your support is greatly appreciated.